Welcome back. This is the Catholic Lady, and we're reading Great Line of God by Taylor Caldwell. We are at chapter 18, and Hillel ben Baruch has passed, and his family needs to be informed. So we'll start with chapter 18. "No, Lord, you cannot send this letter," said Aristo to Reb Isaac, to whose house he had been called. "Saul ben Hillel is a man of deep sensibilities. Your letters could possibly destroy him, and he is a man who must not be destroyed." For Reb Isaac, in his grief and his own self-reproach and his own fear for Hillel ben Baruch's eternal fate, when called before a stern God to account for his deathly act, had written a letter he would have inconsistently deplored in another. He had reproached Saul for apparent disregard and indifference to the kindness and sweetness of fathers, so that father had taken his life. It was a judgment on his heedless and selfish children. Children who loved their parents and had shown those parents their love never had to endure this sorrow. But parents left lonely and abandoned in an empty house were often driven, in their torment of mind and in their longing and yearning, to the unpardonable act, and the unpardonable portion of it lay forever on the souls of the neglected children. Who, asked Reb Isaac in a letter reeking with bitterness, had possessed more worthy a father than Saul ben Hillel? That father had never complained of his children's indifference to him. No, he was too tender for that. He had only suffered. Reb Isaac did not exactly call down pious imprecations on the head of Saul, but the impression was there. The parchment was stained with his own ancient tears. "It is an unjust letter," said Aristo to the old rabbi, whose eyes were reddened and swollen. "Saul loved his father, and so did Sephora, that beautiful young matron. I knew them well. I knew Hillel ben Baruch well also, far more than did many of his friends. I guessed his intentions long ago." Reb Isaac regarded him fiercely, his black eyes blazing. "And you did not attempt to persuade him that he must live? You, who have more reason than most to revere him and to be grateful to him?" "It was for that reason that I did not attempt so," said Aristo. "Lord, we cannot come to a meeting of minds in this matter, for our philosophies differ. What I understand, you cannot understand. Against your God is not a crime to me, nor to millions of others. We did not ask to be born, but we can choose when we die, for surely a man has dignity. You believe in a life beyond this. I do not, though I wish my dear former master an existence of bliss. As Socrates said, one should not fear death, for it is only an endless sleep. Is not sleep sweet? And if there is a life after death, it cannot be worse than this life. Have mercy. Do not send this letter to Saul, nor to Sephora Bas Hillel. I will go to Saul myself, and I will tell him." "What?" exclaimed the rabbi, and now he frankly wiped away fresh tears. "That his father had been ill of an old sickness for a long time. That you will agree is true. He has not wished to cause his children anxiety for him and fear, and so had refrained from enlightening them. That is true also, though now I see you shaking your head. So when in his gardens calmly standing on the bridge, he had been taken with a last chill, a last vertigo, a last fainting, and had fallen into the water. His face, when taken from the pond, was peaceful and quiet, and so it was, and therefore he had not known that he was dying, and had not struggled. We can believe. I will tell Saul that it is possible that he was dead before he fell into the water. I implore you, do not continue to shake your head, for it is true that Hillel ben Baruch died long ago, long before that final evening in the stillness of his gardens. Sophristes, said Rabbi. You Greeks are full of sophristes. A sophistry is preferable to the cruel truth, said Aristo, faintly smiling. And so we know the truth of this? No, it lay in the heart of Hillel ben Baruch, and was not open to the eyes of others. Why cannot you tell Saul then, you so fond of Socrates, that Hillel died tranquilly in his bed and not in the pond? For the reason that the world is filled with men with wagging tongues, and we can be certain that on some day a visitor to Jerusalem, who knew both Hillel and Saul, will tell Saul that his father was found in the water. We have been discreet. We implied to no one what we knew, and so Hillel sleeps beside his wife, unreproached. But Saul is a man of imagination. If I lie to him and say his father died in his bed, and he later hears I lied to him, then he will know of a surety that his father took his life, and I had desired only to spare him. He will not be grateful, but his life thereafter will be one of agony. Do you wish that, you, his old mentor? The rabbi was silent, and the tears fell from his eyes and dripped into his white beard. Then he said in a hoarse voice, I can understand now how you Greeks have seduced our people in Israel, with your sophistries and your clever arguments. Aristo laughed softly. Do you wish that I regret that? No, I am pleased. Your prophets were grim men. I have heard with no joy in life, and only doom and admonitions on their tongues, and threats of punishment and other unfortunate things. I have been told that these matters so prophesied did not come true. But why should men suffer apprehension in advance? Do not all men err and covet the naughty joys of the world? It is our nature. Lord, I beg you, I see the words on your tongue. Not to tell me the meaning of the prophets and the lowering countenance of your God. I heard them to weariness from Saul, who lusted to convert me. You and I have two different frames of reference, and never shall they meet. But on one thing we can agree. The gods love a merciful man. He is full of mercy, said Reb Isaac, and his voice broke. Then I will admire him, said Aristo. Write another letter to Saul, and I will take it with me. I have never been in Israel, though some of my produce passes through that nation in the caravans, and I wish to see Saul again. It is a horror to me, said Reb Isaac, that Hillel informed me, the evening he died, that he had lost his faith in God. Then perhaps that faith has been reestablished, said Aristo, and smiled. That will give him happiness. In Gehenna? Aristo rolled his eyes upwards. Are you drawing the boundaries of your God's mercy and making him less compassionate than a man? Is that not what you would call presumption? Reb Isaac reached across his table and drew parchment and ink to him. I will write Saul a letter more pleasing to you. He gave the Greek a bitter look, and a surly one, but Aristo was pleased. Aristo took passage on the next and swiftest ship to Israel, carrying with him a consoling letter from Reb Isaac and the letters from Hillel's lawyers, for the dead man had left a considerable estate which must be settled. On the ship he met a fellow Greek, one Tellus, expansive, wise, and cynical, who had a house in Jerusalem and estates in Sicilia. He was an amusing companion and informed Aristo that he had spent over a year in Tarsus and in Rome. The antics of politicians, he said to Aristo, were an endless amusement. He was uproarious over the quandaries of Rome, faced with national bankruptcy, an unsurmountable national debt, wars, insurrections in the streets, riots, and an enormously increasing demand from Roman mobs, for new and excessive amusements, housing, food, and gifts. Greece decayed also from similar maladies, he observed to Aristo, and the Roman Republic virtuously commented on this. Notably, one historian, Sallust, and, and their Cicero, whom I admire. Never, said Cicero, must Rome decline to this depravity, ours nor this bankruptcy, and the government be a meek slave to the howling mobs of the marketplaces. Nor would Rome, Cicero hoped, ever become so venal, lascivious, corrupt, and luxurious. Tullus laughed heartily. But it has all come to Rome on a much vaster scale than in Greece, and I, for one, am happy over the condition of that nation of grocers. If Rome falls, she will bring down the world with her, said Aristo, thankful that he had land as well as money. What a world, amused Tullus, his wily and humorous face puckering with 1,000 wrinkles of cynical mirth. I am over 60 years old, and I find this world endlessly amusing. So craven it is, so weak, so whimpering, so greedy, so exigent, so fearful of government, so heedless of history and its warnings, so brutal and sentimental and filthy, with an infinitude of crimes of body and soul. It was always so, said Aristo, and always will be. My friend, I agree with you. Tullus was as tall as Aristo, and as dark, but under the darkness of his complexion there was a peculiar pallor. I am a skeptic, he said, scratching his cheek thoughtfully, as they both leaned over the railing of the bowing ship and looked at the sea and the sky. I am also superstitious, as are the Romans. It is not amusing how they garland their necks with amulets from Delphi and other shrines, both Greek and Roman and even Egyptian, and the gods know where else, and the gods know where else. If an oracle at a shrine informed them that they must wear a horseshoe on their heads, that they would, let's say this one again. I am not superstitious, as are the Romans. It is not amusing how they garland their necks with amulets from Delphi and other shrines, both Greek and Roman, and even Egyptian, and the gods nowhere else? If an oracle at a shrine informed them that they must wear a horseshoe on their heads, they would unshoe every horse in the world, and the horseshoe would be worn in its weight in gold. The Romans have already debased their currency to meet their debts, another sign of imminent collapse, and are using copper. Someone should, if a certainty, start the rumor that horseshoes guarantee the wearer a lifetime of luck, and that the handsomest women and feast and success at the gaming tables, and the Romans could then use iron in their currency, which is cheaper than copper, and lo, most of their problems would be solved. Why do we not finance such a shrine and hire the best priests as oracles? Said Aristo, laughing and smiling. But Tullus had fallen into the thought, he said. I have remarked that I am not superstitious. Pardon me, my allergies are bothering me today. But Tullus had fallen into thought. He said, I have remarked that I am not superstitious. More than a year ago, I acquired a strange pain in my right side, and I began to spit blood occasionally. The episode passed. I ignored the pain, which grew stronger over the months, and went on my journeys. While in Rome, I consulted a physician who informed me that I have a cancer in my lungs and that my days are numbered. Aristo made a sound of commiseration and sympathy, but Tullus raised a hand. I am returning to my house in Jerusalem, he said, because Israel teems with holy rabbis who cure the sick in the twinkling of an eye. I have heard, though I never saw such a miracle for myself. Again, I am not superstitious, and most miracles are superstition, but I have heard a strange rumor out of Israel from a traveling friend. Another holy rabbi has appeared, it is said, out of Galilee, and on a visit to Jerusalem on one of their high holy days, he cured a blind man, a man in extremis, a woman with a cancer, a crippled child, and it is said he raised a youth from the dead whose body was being conveyed to a cemetery. He has aroused much enmity and much love. I hear he has returned to his province for a space. It is my intention to seek him out, and I will fill his hands with honest gold and not debased Roman currency. Now, why should not a man establish a shrine for us in Israel and make a fortune for us? An excellent thought, said Aristo. They debarked at the beautiful port of Caesarea, and Aristo saw that Tellus was growing weaker and paler in spite of his natural liveliness and humor. I have friends in Caesarea, he told Aristo, and I have promised to visit them. Herod Antipas built a fine house for Pontius Pilate here, and they know him well. I hear he is a man of some refinement, for all his alleged excesses and brutalities. Before I left Israel, he had ordered the crucifixion of some hundreds of youths in Galilee for defying the taxpayers and urging the overthrow of the Roman garrison, and even attacking it and tearing down its standards and spitting on it. Tut, tut, that grieves me. He gave a dark smile. The Romans have their troubles everywhere in spite of their Pax Romana and their leadership of the world. Do I wish them well? He made an absent sign, and Aristo laughed. One should pity them for doing exactly as Greece does, and empires before her throughout history, said Aristo, for her end will be the same. They parted at Caesarea, but not before Tellus had arranged magnanimously for Aristo to be conveyed in lavish style to Jerusalem. What is money? Said Tellus with a wink. Aristo surveyed the country luxuriously as he was driven in a fine gilded car with 4 white horses to Jerusalem. He did not find it entrancing, for it was winter, and the air was chill, and the bare mountains were gray and the fields blasted. The towns appeared dismal to him, and the valleys unfruitful, for he was accustomed to the lushness of the valley of Tarsus, even in winter. As a Greek, he felt superior to all other men, and these poor Jews of the fields and the crowded little towns appeared to him to be a miserable and hopeless people, their faces sullen and reserved and abstracted. He saw the round and square brick Roman fortresses, and the ubiquitous soldiers, and the snapping standards of Rome. In Greece, there were these also, and the people accepted them with droll smiles and witty tauntings, and did a fine cheating business with Romans, and mocked them merrily, so that the Romans had to laugh in spite of themselves, and were friendly. They were also awed at the fabled glory and majesty of an ancient Greece, and desired to be known as cultured also. This was hilarious to the Greeks, who humored them for gain. But the Jews were a stiff-necked people, who thought their pride and myths would sustain them, and eventually would free them from the Roman. In the meantime, they despised them openly, and fought with them vainly, a mouse challenging a tiger. Of course, they were wiser men than their fellow Jews. I'm sorry, skip. Bifocals, they're a pain. Okay, of course, there were the Sadducees of whom Hillel had told him. To Aristo, they appeared wiser men than to their fellow Jews, more realistic and therefore more civilized. To do rich business with the conqueror and rob him in the process over a goblet or 2 of wine was sensible and subtle revenge. The majority of Jews did not understand this and would not accept it. Therefore, they were neither clever nor astute and had no humor. Aristo was not impressed by Jerusalem, though this was the teeming commercial center of trade between the East and the West, and always full of caravans. But he did admire the delicate austerity of some Greek temples he saw, and smiled at the large, ornate Roman ones. He thought of the air of Jerusalem, dreary and somber, and too crowded. At sunset, he entered the fine inn recommended by Tellus, and was pleased both by his bedroom and the fare of the kitchen. The food was a strange mixture of Jewish, Greek, Roman, and Egyptian cooking, and exotic, and the wine was excellent. And Aristo thought that he would endure a week or two in the city, and retire to a soft bed, and listened a while to the howling of the jackals outside the gates. He would find Saul tomorrow. As a wise man, he refused to dwell on the meeting and the news he must convey. Tonight he would sleep. And that is the end of chapter 18, part 1. We'll continue with part 2.